This is Matt McCarthy for Rugby Wrap Up, wearing my Next Level Rugby hat. We're outside the Fred Astaire dance studio awaiting Steve Lewis. That's where he works out. Next on Rugby Wrap Up, a holiday spectacular featuring George Hook, Alex Corbisiero, Steve Lewis, and Matt McCarthy with tweaks for rugby, improbable events, and rugby gifts under the tree. Rugby Wrap Up brought to you in part by The Pig and Whistle, the world's best rugby pub. The Murphy Kennedy Group, founded with the idea that construction can be done better. And Lean and Limber, stretching your way to a healthier lifestyle. Hey everybody, welcome back to Rugby Wrap Up. Matt McCarthy in Midtown Manhattan. Thank you for joining us once again. We've got a big show, end of the year show, holiday show. And what better way to celebrate than have the guests that we have on today? None other than Mr. George Hook calling in from Dublin, Mr. Stephen Lewis on the bourgeois Upper West Side of Manhattan, and Mr. Alex Corbisiero in Maryland, of all places. Alex, let's welcome you back first. How are you, my friend?
Mate, it's great to be here. Sorry for a little bit of a shaded studio. We're in the Gustitis basement. As you can see, I've got the shrine behind me on the wall, and we're making do as best we can, but it's great to be back in the US, and obviously always a pleasure to be here.
George, how's things in Dublin?
Well, literally, as we speak, I mean, as I came on the program, the cabinet declared the most extraordinary restrictions. In effect, Christmas is over, to the point of that my children can't come and see me, like legally. So, like, there could be a policeman outside my door preventing my children to come to see me. It's also some sad news for me. My daughter and her family tested positive for COVID. That's really obviously very worrying. We tested negative. But over here, and indeed in Britain, we're looking at restrictions which I don't think in the history of democracy have existed.
Yeah, it's not an easy thing.
We can't go to Mass for the first time since the penal laws of the 18th century. We cannot go to Mass.
Yeah, we've been dealing with that here in New York City for quite some time. It was.
But you never went to Mass anyway.
How dare you, sir? How dare you?
We're the real king over here.
How dare you? But we're going to switch to rugby. But before that, we're going to say hello to Stephen. Stephen, how are you?
Just peachy.
Just peachy. Good. Succinct. We like that. All right, so gentlemen, let's get to the rugby. And for a holiday show, an end-of-the-year show, we came up with a couple of ideas, and the first thread of which is we each recall an improbable event in rugby. Alex?
My improbable event of 2020 is the dismantling and relegation of the Saracens dynasty, which I think, as much as they've been punished and maybe found guilty or slapped on the wrist a couple of times, I think the actual end result of how their players have been shipped out, how they're relegated to the championship, there is no championship, the premiership's going on. To me, that's the improbable event for me. I didn't see that coming into this year.
And England's biggest star is sitting idle right now until March, right?
Yeah, which I don't think a lot of them are probably going to complain too much about. They just played the autumn, still getting club wage, get paid your England plays, do the Six Nations, roll into the Lions, then hopefully Saracens will be back up and back to normal.
Stephen?
Yeah, I think, well, the improbable event is the disease that no one saw coming, right? So, you know, in the main, it's wrecker of lives, destroyer of all the worlds. We talked previously about religion being the opium of the masses, and now sport is the opium of the masses, and we are denied our bread of Christ. We have been denied that thing that connects us, and sport is just one part of it, but COVID has wrecked sport. Aided and abetted, one has to say, by inept and corrupt political leadership the world over. Talking to you, Trump, talking to you, Johnson. So just horrific, improbable thing.
We're going to keep going. We're going to keep trying to stick to rugby, but we're going down a different path.
Swerving it. George,
George, that segues right to you, my friend.
That segues right to me. I think the improbable event of 2020 is the dismantling and relegation of the Saracens dynasty, which I think, as much as they've been punished and maybe found guilty or slapped on the wrist a couple of times, I think the actual end result of how their players have been shipped out, how they're relegated to the championship, there is no championship. The premiership's going on.
Well, to an American audience, if Robert E. Lee announced that the leadership of the Army of the Confederacy was to be entirely composed of blacks, then the shockwaves couldn't have been greater than in Irish rugby. For over 100 years, the Ulster, the Northern Province, has been uniformly Protestant because the Protestant schools played rugby, the Catholic schools played Gaelic football. This year, for the first time in history, not only Catholics playing for Ulster, but in many games, the majority of the team were Papists. I mean, it is incredible. And to the everlasting pride, really, of Ulster people, they've supported that team with the same vigor, albeit not there, with the same vigor that they previously supported the Protestant team. I think it's an incredible event that I never saw coming.
Stephen, I think you might have something to offer on this.
Oh, well, as a irredeemably lapsed Papist or Fenian, who's been, had stones thrown at him, warming up in multiple games in Belfast when they think I'm a Protestant when I wasn't.
I don't know if that was why they were throwing. I think they were just throwing rocks.
Stones at us. There was, 20 years ago, there was very much a religious divide, and rugby, as George correctly says, was a Protestant sport in the north. Coming from the west of Scotland, we had mixed teams, half Catholic, half Protestant. So it was always a source of banter for us, unless you were talking about football. But to George's point, the Ulster fans are as fanatical as ever, and they've embraced this, what is essentially a demographic change, which you're seeing both politically and in rugby.
All right. Well, next week, tune in for lapsed Fenians and geopolitical fun facts from Ulster. But in the meantime, we're going to stick to rugby. Alex, I got to go to you on this one just to get away from these two. A positive story in the year.
Okay, Caleb Clark. Okay, they were preparing for the Olympics, getting ready to, play New Zealand Sevens, committed to this journey. COVID comes, it wrecks New Zealand Sevens. He gets a chance to play Super Rugby. He shines. All of a sudden now, someone who may not have come to the forefront is basically the jewel in the All Black crown and their sort of new sort of attacking weapon. And so let's stick to that as a rugby-related positive story.
Well, again, a comparison between the US and Ireland. I mean, underage rugby in Ireland is a bit like high school football in Texas. And if you look at Saline High School in Texas, who are the biggest, have won the state championship more times than anybody else, the comparison in Ireland is Blackrock College or St. Michael's College. And lo and behold, to reach the final of both underage championships, this tiny rural high school, co-ed to boot, reaches the final of both the underage championships. Sadly not played because of COVID, but never in over 100 years of high school rugby has that happened. A small school reaching both finals. And I thought it was the most uplifting story imaginable. And I don't know any small high schools in Texas. I don't think they exist. But if there is one down there where Buddy Holly was born and they suddenly won the state championship, you can imagine the excitement. That's what it was like over here. It was hugely uplifting.
Yeah, well, maybe Nigel Melville getting another job in professional rugby that will keep him away from American rugby. That's a positive. We're probably the only real positive is we're only like 9 days away from 2021, where American rugby players will get back on the field. So that's my positive. MLR starting, women going to a World Cup in New Zealand, Olympics for the men and women's sevens teams. So I'm just looking forward. There's not much positive in 2020 for me.
All right. Well, we'll go to the negative events that caught your eye in the year, but I did have two others that were runner-up. I had Los Pumas beating the All Blacks and Munster's epic win over Claremont in the Champions Cup. Just unbelievable. But let's go to George and Steve's favorite topic, negatives of 2020. Let's start with you, Steve.
Well, as we discussed previously on the catastrophic leadership in politics the world over, we need to look no closer for more catastrophic leadership than USA Rugby. A feckless, toxic brand, feckless leadership that delivered the union into bankruptcy. We've got to distinguish here between the administrative brand USA Rugby, which I'm being negative about, and American rugby and American rugby players, which I'm very positive about. Back to USA Rugby's bankruptcy. You know, they sort of got away with it because COVID hit immediately afterwards, but they were going down anyway. And it is important to remember why they're bankrupt. Incompetence, financial mismanagement, criminal misappropriation of membership funds. These are important things to remember. This didn't just happen in a vacuum. So they're out of bankruptcy. The players are getting back on the field next year. So hopefully it is a rosier time for American rugby.
I spent some emotional moments there listening to Steve Lewis. 5 years of my life, I was utterly involved with USA Rugby. I was in Colorado Springs at the head office, and I saw the beginnings of what Steve Lewis has now talked about. And it saddens me hugely. You can't imagine. But then, as an Irishman, and as somebody who's been involved in this game for now over 70 years, it has never been worse as a spectacle and as something to enjoy. The great thing about our game was, and we always said it, you can be a fat guy, a thin guy, a tall guy, a small guy, a fast guy, a slow guy. It doesn't matter. It's a spot for you in that rugby team. No longer is that the case. You know, when Jonah Lumu came on the pitch in Johannesburg in that World Cup in '95, we thought he was unusual. Now he isn't anymore. They're all big guys. And the game is just for big guys. It's kick the ball up in the air and run after it. It is awful.
I'm going to go with a story of Pat Quinn, who was the co-founder of the ALS Bucket Challenge. One could easily argue that this was a positive for all the positive stuff that he did in bringing attention to what is inherently or known more popularly as Lou Gehrig's disease. But you know, a friend dying is never a positive, especially to such a hideous disease. But he did put it on the he put it on the radar a lot more than it was. But Pat, we miss you, buddy. Alex, do you have a negative? Because you're a very positive guy.
My negative is it's kind of the rugby hierarchs of across the world that I think when COVID first happened and we saw how vulnerable and susceptible rugby was to this pandemic and how a lot of the cracks that had been papered over of the financials, of the way that the different properties in rugby were working together, all of a sudden got exposed. It looked like collaboration, potential global season, aligning things, reform was on the horizon. And then as more time went on, all the same issues of egos, elbows up, inability to agree, let's just carry on as normal. Like, it looked like COVID to me initially could have been the catalyst to get, you know, a lot of change done in the rugby landscape that would align a lot of properties, make the calendar more profitable, and work out together. But instead, we've kind of seen everyone look after their own and gone back to the sort of the current themes of what holds rugby back. That's probably my big frustration of the year.
All right, we're going to break for commercial, but before we do, I'm going to end this on a semi-positive note. Before we go into the break, I'm also going to add a positive in that we are now having more frequent awkward conversations about race. They are uncomfortable, they're awkward, but they're necessary. But don't go away, ladies and gentlemen, because we've got tweaks to the game and what each of us would leave under a Christmas tree right after this.
If you're in New York City and want to watch some great rugby, have some great food, and some great times, go to the world's best rugby pub, the Pig and Whistle on West 36th Street.
Been blind since I was 4. And I've never seen a beer commercial or a beer label. None of that stuff influences me. I drink beer because of the taste. And my beer is Pabst Blue Ribbon. It has the taste and the flavor.
What do you think's on the label?
I think there's a naked woman riding on a unicorn, jumping over fire. Oh, that's good beer.
And we are back. Matt McCarthy in Midtown Manhattan, Steve Lewis on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, George Hook in Dublin, and Alex Corbisiero in Maryland, of all places. Guys, we left off with a cliffhanger saying that we were going to talk about tweaks to the game and gifts under the tree. Let's start with tweaks to the game. And Alex, let's start with you.
Thanks, Matt. My tweaks to the game is actually Scrum Reform, to tidy up some of the areas that need fixing. I think I posted on my Twitter the other day a video explaining how certain teams are changing their setup technique, which I think is much more positive to the game. But I have a bigger bone to gripe that I think if you watch the video, you see how second rows move their feet back on the bind. It adds more weight forward. I think that should be banned in rugby because I think it's causing too many. I think certain teams can do it well, but there's too many teams doing it poorly, and as you go down the levels it gets even worse in rugby, and I think it's leaving reset scrums. I think it leads to collapses because it's instability on the engage, especially if you lose with that style of scrummaging. And so I think it's kind of ruining our sport, where as someone who works at NBC, which is trying to grow a big audience and show this new sport, I don't want to be bogged down in 2-3 minute patches of scrum reset, because the referees can't figure out what's going on, and they keep going. And I think that is, to me, a huge factor that could be easily just, World Rugby says all second rows now need to come up off the 2 knees. Number 8s can't pre-engage their weight until the referee says set. And I honestly think scrums in 2021 will look a lot better for the public to digest. And so that is my big gripe, an area where I think can be fixed. It's a simple fix. Everyone watch the video on my Twitter, Alex Corbs, and please get on the bandwagon of encouraging your teams to change a scrum setup and putting pressure on World Rugby to sort of nick that out of the game, because it's just kind of gone unchecked and no one's really seen it. But now hopefully that video highlights it. More people will get on the bandwagon of stopping to do that.
Coming to a league near you soon. Kicking clock reduced from 90 seconds to 60. 7 point for a try under the post. And my personal favorite, which may not be coming to a league near us soon, is get rid of the caterpillar ruck. It's an obscenity.
I kind of like the caterpillar ruck, but is it only 7 under the posts?
Yep, it's like a penalty try.
So we're kind of going
away with the conversion. You're speeding the game up, right? And all these things. You're trying to make the game more entertaining.
Oh, so no conversion, just an automatic 7 under the try.
Automatic 7, yeah.
Okay, how about and you want to adopt something along the lines of the World Tens, where you have different scoring opportunities from different spots on the field?
Yep.
All right. George?
Well, what I would do is I would have 13 players aside, take away the 2 flankers, scrap the line out, bring in the 6 tackle rule, and then I think we're home free. We're off and running.
Are mullets a prerequisite?
But they already play this game, George. It's called Rugby League.
Right.
And it's shite.
Jack Kyle, the greatest fly half that ever played the game anywhere in the world. And in his dotage, he said to me, George, please explain, why do rugby players run at rugby players and not run at space? And therein, my friend, as Shakespeare would have put it, lies the rub.
I endorse most of what George says. What he's describing is rugby league, so I don't see the point of that. But the premises are correct, about how do you get space? How do we rediscover space? How do we rediscover joy? How do we rediscover spontaneity? How do you reward skillful players? These are the things we need to look at.
Here are 2 things. Every sport goes through cycles. You had the NHL where they were vilified for playing the trap, but they played the trap because that's what their personnel was able to do successfully. It was the most boring brand of hockey, watching the New Jersey Devils and the Florida Panthers play in a hockey game in a Stanley Cup final, 7 games, was the most boring hockey ever. But hey, that's what they did. You had the NFC smash mouth football versus the NFC West wide open spread offense. it changes. But George, we're all here because we love the game of rugby, 15s rugby. So we all enjoyed it. At some point, we all enjoyed it.
No, hold on. We're not all here because we love rugby. There is one of the four of us does not love rugby, and he's speaking to you. I'm not interested in watching it. I'm not interested in paying for it, and only that I will not force my grandchildren. I would prefer if they didn't play it.
I understand the premises of why people are upset with rugby right now, because the rules seem to think it's almost better to not have the ball than have the ball. So really, what does that do for the emphasis of attacking rugby? It means, because the reason why a lot of the rules right now, the breakdown rules have been favored to defense, is because it's true. Teams weren't playing for space. They were just playing phase ball and holding on to the ball long enough, and then eventually getting either penalties, which would lead to driving maul, field position, attack, and play rugby that way, or eventually would finally break down after 30, 40, 20 plus phases, and it was the only way they knew how to score. The emphasis on rugby is not to remove players to create space. The emphasis on rugby is to re-educate players to make decisions on the ball. Right now, there's too much of a decision of, there's a wall in front of me, let me run at it. We need to be attacking space. Players, all those pods off 9 that forwards are carries, they're not just dead carries running into brick walls. You've got to have decisions. You've got to have an outside tip, an inside tip, a 10 out the back. You've got to have a 10 creating space. The new rules are basically putting massive pressure on being hyper clinical with the ball. And if you are a rugby player, a team that cannot execute under pressure and eliminate that space, it's better to kick it and not have the ball. And that's why you see England only turn it on when they need it. The All Blacks only turning it on when they need it, because right now playing phase ball or holding onto the ball into your own half is getting punished by penalties because the defense have the upper hand with the way that the breakdown is reffed at the moment. The game needs to update itself with the way that it's being reffed, and it needs to move towards what I think everyone's talking about is we need to get back to attacking space and being clinical with the ball and not being these robotic, big, muscly men that just bash lumps out of each other.
My tweak, you mentioned refs and the refereeing. I'm stealing mine from Nigel Owens. And he has suggested a couple, but one I'm going to hone in on is the substitutions. Let's knock them down to 4. It's 4 subs per team. That way you get more guys playing more rugby. You're going to have smaller players. You're going to have tired players. You're not going to have the horrific injuries that we have now with guys that are completely playing on a full tank, coming in with an army of reserves. I'm going with. So I got a hand raised. Alex, you got a hand raised there. Go ahead.
Can I rebuttal why
you can,
I disagree?
But I might mute your mic.
I've heard this argument a few times. The only worry that I have is the length of the rugby season. What we know now about the risks of concussion and subconcussive blows, and by you're exposing the players that are on the field to more risk in my mind by not having the substitutions. I get the argument about the physicality impact of bringing on these big hyped up men for 20 minutes where they just smash lumps. But then, say you don't have big props coming off the bench now, the wear and tear of props playing 80 minutes every week is gonna shorten careers that way and potentially lead to more lumps and knocks to the head, which, who knows what the long-term ramifications of increasing that load would be.
Stephen.
Less panelists. I'm sitting on the bench here. You haven't used me in 10 minutes.
Well, Stephen, just Alex is raising his hand. Raise your hand. You'll be called on.
It's like school. What
do you have to say, Stephen? Stephen, you have something to say?
No, just waiting for the next segment.
It's a talk show, guy. All right, next segment. So Stephen Lewis can get back involved. What would you leave under the tree, either for a rugby personality or the rugby fan?
Well, as a Scotsman, we're not particularly big on Christmas. Christmas was actually abolished in 1640 by the Scottish Parliament with the connivance of the Kirk, which is the Church of Scotland, who frowned on all things remotely Catholic or Papist or Fenian. So actually, Christmas in Scotland was officially a holiday in 1958. If you know me, you'll know that Hogmanay, New Year's Eve, is a much more important holiday. So on Hogmanay, what would I leave for you, my friend Matthew, under your Yuletide tree? A good bottle of single malt and maybe a $500 voucher to Zara so you get some clothes on finally.
Fair play. I'm flattered that I was the choice as a rugby personality or a rugby fan. I'm not sure which, but thank you, Stephen.
Fan.
Well, Billy Beaumont, the head of World Rugby, his tree will be my choice. And under the tree, I would leave a list of all 70 names of the rugby union players catastrophically brain damaged by this game and through the incompetence of the regulators of the game over the last 20 or 25 years. And I'd just like him to remember who they were.
All right, so I'm going to go out of turn here. I'm going to say, how about the ability for every fan to watch any rugby live from their sofa without having to run the risk of being overrun or hijacked or hacked by unsavory websites and the like. It would be nice to be able for everybody. If you have to pay for it, you have to pay for it, but to be able to watch any rugby anywhere live from your own home. Alex, anything?
Have you not seen Peacock TV? Have you not seen Peacock TV by the lovely NBC?
Ladies and gentlemen, this is another NBC plug. Go ahead.
Champion Cup Rugby, Premiership, Six Nations, Secret. The Lions is going to be on there. It's a pretty good deal.
So where was I supposed to watch Munster versus Claremont?
On Peacock, $4.99 live and on demand, advertisement free on your phone, tablet, computer, or smart TV. You have a bunch of other sports, and you have the full video and movie library of NBC Universal.
All right.
So you get Law and Order.
I don't think so, big guy. Copies of the membership card swipes from the gym Mr. Kona was at last night. Video on these tapes was taken from the gym surveillance cameras, showing exactly when Mr. Kona arrived and left.
You get movies, you get everything. In the US, you pay $4.99 a month on top of your subscription, and you get every game live demand on your phone. People in England would bite your hand off for the deal that Peacock has.
Okay, I sit corrected on the Peacock thing, but we need more Peacocks out there and not at $20 a pop. $4, $5 we can handle. Anyway, one other thing I wanted to put under a Christmas tree or a holiday tree or a holiday symbol here on American soil is a thriving and growing Major League Rugby and a fiscally sound USA Rugby. Alex, you're leaving either a rugby personality or a rugby fan a present under the tree. What is it? And don't say it's Peacock subscriptions.
Peacock subscription. I'll take it. Thanks.
Yeah, I've got one for Stephen. I'm giving a uncontrolled contact and training pass to professional rugby players under the tree. It is a pass for rugby players that if they have this pass in their hand, that means that when they train, they don't take uncontrolled contact in the week and they save it for rugby on the weekend, which is a way I think the game should move completely as we are, as George referenced, that lawsuit and other things are going on. Reducing the amount of contact and training to me is one of the biggest areas we can positively impact some of those areas that we're starting to see come out in the news.
You can't go wrong with that. All right, and to end the show and the program, I want to offer you guys happiness and health under your trees, under your respective celebratory whatever you have. Steve, what would I be placing yours under?
Mistletoe.
Mistletoe. It's got a different connotation, but it's all good. But seriously, health and happiness to all of you. I know that we're all dealing with some stuff right now. So let's all get healthy, happy, and come back in 2021. I'll see you guys in 2021. I'll see you next year. On that note, Mr. George Hook, Mr. Stephen Lewis, Mr. Alex Corbisiero, thank you on behalf of these gentlemen and on behalf of Rugby Wrap-Up. A happy and healthy holiday to all of you. I'm Matt McCarthy. We appreciate your time.